Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to talk about the most one-sided civilization matchups in Age of Empires 2, and those rare moments where someone may have a point complaining about a civ win. Now, I covered this topic a few years ago, but given the new civs, balance updates, and more current stats I have, I thought it'd be fun to take a second look. Now, conventional wisdom and experience probably have a few matchups coming to mind already, but in my experience, these sorts of things are a lot harder to predict than you might think. The classic example is Mayans against Goths. It feels like everything Mayans make have a Goth hard counter, whether it's eagles running into discounted Goth champions, or Mayan plumed archers and the crossbow line running up against Huscarls. Mayans don't even have champion, or of course heavy cavalry, as options to counter Huscarls with raw melee stats, so it just looks like a losing matchup. The thing is though, if we check the actual real-life results, while that is the case at mid-elo levels, with Mayans having a relatively poor 44% win rate in the almost 9,000 times these civs have gone head-to-head, if you focus on higher-level games, it's quite close to a fair fight. And for what it's worth, Mayans had the edge last patch on Arabia. It just goes to show, don't bet against the Mayan economy. Another example for Goths is based on tech trees. Byzantines should arguably have a huge advantage between their anti-infantry unique unit, faster imperial time, and decent gunpowder. According to the stats though, it's again basically equal, and if anything, Goths are actually doing slightly better in that matchup, both recently and over a longer time period. Now, I have not just the recent rank data of the last few months for all of the civ combos, but also data going back 2 years from AoE2's.io. So in this video, we're going to look at a few of the matchups that really jump out in the numbers and suggest there may be an element of a civ win going on. Naturally, we'll caveat all of this by pointing out there are almost 1,000 unique civ pairings at this point, so outliers and weird results are going to creep in, even with reasonable sample sizes, and this is just to highlight the most interesting patterns that jump out. With all that said, we'll start off with the Aztecs against infantry civilizations, which broadly looks like a big advantage for the Aztec opponent. That might sound strange, given Aztecs have a unique unit that literally specializes in being anti-infantry, and yet pretty much any civilization with either an infantry focus or even an infantry unique unit seems to have a good record against Aztecs. So what's going on here? What comes to mind first is it's a great illustration of why you can't just think about unique units and late game matchups, with Aztecs currently losing a lot of quick games in which their anti-infantry aspect doesn't come into play. You also have to consider good infantry civs often have a very strong answer to Aztec eagles, with either their own swordsman line or an infantry unique unit, most of which have a bonus against them. You could maybe argue this highlights the Jaguar warrior needing a buff to make it more viable in Castle Age, at least within its anti-infantry role. As it stands though, the only infantry civ that Aztecs seem to be holding their own against is the Goths. Moving on in a similar vein, our very next one-sided matchup is the Gurjaras against many of those same infantry civs, this time including Aztecs. Now this one makes a little more intuitive sense in my opinion, and is also the kryptonite of Hindustanis as another camel civilization, though the stats aren't quite as dramatic. The main military bonus for Gurjaras is that their mounted units deal more bonus damage, which, while that sounds great for their camels against knights, is not so helpful against infantry or archers. Against archer generalist civs, Gurjaras then have the Shravamsha rider, elephant archer, and to an extent the chakram thrower, which can all work very well against range units through negating projectiles, having high HP, or using pass-through damage, which can be devastating against low HP units like the crossbow line. Most of this isn't really what you're looking for against infantry though, and playing Gurjaras, it can sometimes be hard to come up with a good response against infantry, with the chakram probably your best option. Another small factor here is man-at-arms can actually be quite dangerous against Gurjar mills, where players typically put their sheep, so what's arguably your main eco bonus can then feel more threatened than it is by say a straight archer or scout civilization. It's altogether just a tough set of matchups for what's otherwise a pretty solid civilization, and in fact Gurjaras versus Incas is technically the most one-sided result of the last few months, albeit with not a huge sample size. Moving on, our third outlier is a funny one, and this is the issues that Goths are seemingly having against Armenians, basically since release, but especially in the last few months after the Armenian mule cart buff. Both are of course officially infantry civs, with Goths having a steep discount and Armenians having access to most barracks units and age early, as well as a unique tech for extra HP. In reality, the tech advantage and their strong economy from the mule cart are probably behind this, but in my own headcanon, I like to think a small part is the dynamic of their unique units. Goths are of course anti-archer, partly because of the Huskarls' incredible pierce armor, which the Armenians' composite bowman then just ignores, making them feel closer to a slinger or hand cannoneer than a regular archer. I mentioned it can be misleading to focus on unique unit dynamics, but either way, the stats suggest this is a matchup where Armenians have a distinct edge. Sticking with a bit of that archer theme, next up we have most archer civs against Romans, with Romans having a pretty big edge in a lot of those cases. Now, Romans are right at the top of the ladder recently, so it's not exactly like any type of civ is really doing all that well against them in general. They have their always scary 5% better villagers, better armor for their infantry, along with decent cavalry. Still, their success against archer civs is what really jumps out to me. At least one factor for this is the strength of having just that one more armor in Feudal Age, taking 50% more arrows from archers in Feudal, and plus 50% to double the number of arrows from crossbows in Castle Age compared to a civ with or without gambesons. The way the numbers work out, archers are just disproportionately impacted because of their lower attack, and are also then doubly hit by the Romans' good scorpions in the mid-game as well, which I suspect is leading to the very one-sided results we're seeing. Moving on, speaking of archer civs, next we have another bad matchup for them, this time against the Persians. This one makes a lot of sense for a few reasons, and is one you probably could have predicted ahead of time. The first reason is cavalry civs in general have a bit of an edge over archers on the ladder, but Persians specifically have +2 attack for their knights against those, then adding in the unique Savar upgrade with its extra pierce armor and anti-archer bonus damage. This isn't all archers being impacted, mind you, and some have respectable, albeit still losing records against Persians. Vietnamese and Korean seem to be struggling in particular though, which isn't really a surprise given they seem like the civs Persians thrive against, seemingly by design. Our next one-sided civ matchup is a bit more broad, and is how much cavalry archer civilizations are struggling against Hindustanis. Huns are a bit of an exception here, being fairly balanced against them, helped I'm sure by the fact Huns are a top-tier civ of their own, but Magyars, Mongols, and Tatars are looking a little rough. This really comes down, in my opinion, to Hindustanis having a combination of great camels and the Ghulam as an anti-archer specialist. That means not just having 2 good answers to any cavalry archers they face, but also reflects the somewhat mediocre stable or archery range units that cavalry archer civs might be using in Castle Age prior to their cavalry archer transition. It's just a tough matchup and a bit of a civ counter to the cavalry archer game plan, especially in Castle Age when the cavalry archer civ's power spike is supposed to be coming in, but in this case plays exactly into the strength of units that Hindustanis are often making already. Moving on, it may sound a bit self-contradictory here given everything I said at the beginning, but next I'm going with archer civs against Goths. Yes, I know I said at higher levels Mayans actually seem to hold their own on open maps, but across the wider data, let's face it, Goths are very good against archer civs. They have a solid Dark Age bonus with instant loom, and while you might think men-at-arms or longswords would be relatively ineffective against archers, Goths actually have decent cavalry in the mid-game, with bloodlines on their knights for example, making them surprisingly tough to knock out early. If they can manage to hold on until building a castle, the Huskarl can then basically win the game. So archer specialist civs can often feel like they're on a timer, especially if their biggest power spike comes a bit later, like the Britons. The funny exception is Ethiopians have a positive win rate against Goths over the last few years, so it shows again that the odd archer civ can be successful. Now before we get to the last one, I have 2 honorable mentions that weren't technically among the most one-sided results, but I just wanted to highlight. The first is Tatars against Mongols. Let's play a game and see if you can guess which one I'm talking about here. Head-to-head, the stronger one has an early food bonus leading to a great scout rush, followed up with a flexible archery range and stable, including steppe lancers, with then the ultimate goal of building a massive cavalry archers to end the game, possibly even adding in their strong unique unit to help deliver the final blow. I'd argue that could actually describe both of these civs reasonably well, though it turns out in practice, Mongols do it just a little bit better head-to-head, with a 53% win rate. Likewise, in a similar way, we have the Burmese versus Spanish. Both civs get out to a relatively slow start, miss some critical techs for their archers, and in a perfect world would love to rush up a castle and raid with their high damage but inaccurate mounted ranged unit. Head to head, it turns out Spanish just do that a bit better, winning again 53% of the time. But finally, we'll end on the second most dramatic win rate discrepancy in all 990 combinations after the earlier mentioned Gurjar versus Inca matchup. Ending things off, we have Bohemians against Byzantines, with this going absolutely terribly for Byzantines. This has become especially bad since the Bohemians buffed their Hussite wagon last year, giving it a much greater ability to hit and run, and I think the Hussite wagon really is the story here. Byzantines, of course, specialize in making counter units, including trash and camels, none of which do any bonus damage or have a lot of success at all against Hussite wagons. The cataphract is likewise not a great option either, even if you could afford it, and Byzantines are then lacking bloodlines, so they can't even fall back on decent knights or even light cavalry to counter Bohemian wagons and monks. For all their tech tree options, they're just left with not much besides mangonels as a decent response. It's probably not the first matchup that came to mind at the outset, but just seems to be a tough one for Byzantines on both closed and open maps, as not just consistently one of their worst, but one of the most one-sided matchups in the data. That'll do it for this one though. Let me know your least favorite or perhaps favorite matchup to face personally if you think I missed a good one. Shout out to James, Jared2142, Justin, Samantha, Stephen, Woodruff, and everyone else on Patreon for their amazing support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.